Ladies and I am flying solo as we speak. Missing Carlito Caribbean Tool. The macho man Ricky Savage is not here with us, so I'm going to be hosting for the time being. Um, so again, I'm usually co-pilot, so bear with me here, and we'll just jump right into it. Welcome to the Wrestling Den here at 7 o'clock sharp as usual for our wrestling discussion, your weekly wrestling discussion. So we'll just kind of start off some of the things that we've been talking about AEW a lot recently, and with that in mind, I think what we should do is kind of switch over to the other side of the fence, speak about the WWE and some of the changes that's happening over there, some of the things that they're doing well, some of the things they're not doing so good. Um, One of the biggest things is that they're rebranding NXT. With the rebranding of NXT, they are kind of shifting away from Triple H, who get well soon, to Triple H because he did have a cardiac event, as they put it. He was in the hospital, but I believe he's expected to make a full recovery. But when it rains, it pours for him because they kind of removed him as creative director of NXT, and it's being overseen by Kevin Dunn, but I think Bruce Pritchard and Vince McMahon himself. So they came around, didn't like what they saw, and then decided to kind of rebrand it and move it into a different direction. Um, I don't really know what that means. Sometimes it's when old and out of touch guys like Vince, like Bruce, like Kevin Dunn, they do know how to produce a television show. But who knows if in this day and age they can captivate audiences like they used to in the late 90s. Same group of guys, and then they used to pull us in the Attitude Era. But times change, things change, and I think Triple H was doing a good job at you know, getting this talent developed and, getting their name out there. And any guy, the cream of the crop was rising to the top, as the Macho Man would say. And, but then whenever they'd come over to the main roster, I think that the guys on SmackDown and Raw would know what to do with these guys. They rebrand their characters. They do what they did to Karrion Kross, make him look like a member of Demolition, and it just didn't translate well. But I think as they tried to give these guys creative, tried to make them characters on TV for the bigger shows, Raw and SmackDown, they left a lot of the professional wrestling elements of these characters, the realism of these characters, on the cutting room floor. And then they could turn around and blame Triple H. Say, why isn't this guy getting over on Raw? He was getting over like gangbusters on NXT. They don't realize that they're part of the problem. They don't realize that they're archaic institutions of how they produce their wrestling shows or how they produce their entertainment shows. It just doesn't translate as well. At least with the slapsticky, as Jim Cornette would say, outlaw mud show esque elements of AEW, at least they're trying new things. At least they're trying to um, appeal to a newer audience of wrestling fans. I'm sure there was things in the Attitude Era that Jim Cornette himself didn't necessarily approve. A lot of hot shotting, a lot of never-ending, overbooking of things, lots of run-ins, lots of things like that. I'm sure he didn't like it then, but the business was booming, so you can't argue with the result, no matter how long or short term that was. But then when he speaks critically of AEW, perhaps he just doesn't understand you have to cater to that audience as of now. Your old school wrestling fans are still going to be a lot for them. There's still going to be a lot of like, oh, you see Jake the Snake on TV, you see Arn Anderson, but flipping back to WWE, I just think they're resting on their laurels. They're an entertainment company. They uh, fancy themselves the Disney of wrestling, and so it's a lot of cookie cutter stuff. It's not very edgy. It's not what we grew up with. It's not Stone Cold. It's not The Rock. It's not the New Age Outlaws. It's not DX. It's not Ministry Undertaker. It's something else. It's a cookie cutter product, and I think that that rubs people the wrong way for sure, and that's going to cause people to flip over to a different product. What people need to realize with a lot of these signings jumping over to AEW is a lot of them are very cut from the same cloth. Like they're your Adam Coles, your Bryan Danielsons, your CM Punks. They're the indie darlings as they used to be known. And before CM Punk became such a big thing, he was an indie darling. Bryan Danielson was an indie darling. Adam Cole was an indie darling. So were the Bucks. So was Kenny Omega. More so gotten big in Japan in Kenny's example, but it's a lot of guys who do that. And the WWE, they don't ever see these things as a loss because it's the land of the giants. And NXT was the antithesis of that. NXT was the antithesis of the land of the giants philosophy that Vince has had for so long. But he likes the Brock Lesnar's and the Chris Masters, even on the complete opposite end of the scope. Roman Reigns, that's why you knew out of the Shield, Seth was the most charismatic, but Roman was always going to be the guy. He was always going to be the guy out of the Shield that they were going to push. And it wasn't until they pushed him heel, which, speaking of things that WWE's at least doing right, when they made Roman heel, paired him with Paul Heyman, that was the right move. And it is one of the only things that anyone believes because of Paul Heyman's ability to sell it. We all know the story of Roman Reigns, that he was the golden child. He was the next John Cena, and they were pushing him as such. They were all over it in the sense of, we want you to love this guy. They didn't realize we were never going to like Roman Reigns until they leaned into the things that we didn't like about him, until he just accepted the fact that he's a better heel. He's a better heel than he was a face, and then they've been riding this tribal chief thing out and letting Paul Heyman do what he does, is be a hype man, be an advocate, be agent. It's what you have to call to this day and age is managers, is agents. And that's what Paul Heyman does really well for Roman. Without that pairing, I don't think Roman would be over like he is. When you do something like that, though, when you do something right, like a Roman Reigns title reign, you have to be careful how you bring that to a close, how you take the heat that Roman's generating and how he gives the rub to the next guy. That's how you build stars. If you make one star, that star needs to be able to help facilitate the next one. And like you said, we've talked about this at length about WWE's inability to make new stars, like why they tread water, why when we see John Cena, we get excited because John Cena is the last real star in the WWE. You do have Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns and Kevin Owens and, Bobby Lashley coming back to a different extent. But it is one of those things where it's hard for them to maintain that. And so when you get to the part where Roman's supposed to lose the title, unlike Kofi Kingston, you see, they gave Kofi this title run. It ran its course. It was great. We were all into it. And then they just fed him to Brock. And that, it's a bittersweet ending. So instead of building up the next guy, they just defaulted back to something they know that works, which is the land of the giants, the Brock Lesnar, the Beast. And yes, Brock, people tune into pay-per-view to watch him have a wrestling match. Yes. And when he goes up against Goldberg even, or he goes up against whomever, it draws ratings. But they have to realize Brock cannot be the golden egg laying goose all the time. You need to take the shine. Some people need to be able to get the rub from Brock. And I know that, there's going to be a lot of comments in the chat about Brock rubbing people. But point is, in wrestling, that shine has to rub off on other people. But whenever something doesn't work, they hit the panic button. There's no consistency. There's no long-term goals or plan, it seems, with the WWE. So as far as things that they're doing wrong, definitely, I would say that they're not staying consistent to what they need to be doing. I just wouldn't want to see them, continue to flounder, continue to dip in ratings, continue to have to make cuts of potential. What they did with all these younger guys when they made all these cuts, they limited their future potential, their return on investment. You have all these people in NXT learning the ropes, learning the WWE system, the production, how to exist in that world, and then before they ever get a chance to apply that, they get cut off at the cut off at the knees, and suddenly they're letting all these people go. Like Braun Strowman got so much TV time, so much hype, and if they would have just handled him correctly, he could still be there. Same thing with Bray Wyatt or the Fiend, if they would have just stayed consistent to it. But sometimes I don't think Vince knows what he wants. I think he doesn't know where he's going, doesn't know what direction he wants to take things in, and because of that, because of, like I said, this archaic mindset and perspective, it becomes paint by numbers. He just goes back to what he definitively thinks works, and then he just delivers to us the same thing over and over again, and it becomes stale. And for us as an audience, we just say, "Oh, here we go again," And so Brock comes out. Speaking of things that are being done right, though, so this is my fear with this Roman Reigns Brock Lesnar interaction that they had on SmackDown is Brock comes out. And there's a connection, obviously, because Paul Heyman was his advocate. And then that's great television. To watch Paul Heyman squirm because his new girlfriend and his old girlfriend are in the same room, it's great because Paul Heyman knows how to sell that. He knows how to make it work. The concern, though, with the booking is if Brock doesn't put Roman over, we're just back to square one. So you're in a position where why build Roman this way just to give the shine back to Brock? It's not worth it. Brock doesn't need that. Brock doesn't need heat. He doesn't need the title. He doesn't. Why? Why would he need that? He's an attraction in and of himself. Yeah, and like people are saying in the chat, it would be farcical, funny even, or dumb to do that. I agree 100%. But he's there. And if he's not there to solidify Roman further, to sell tickets, that's the whole point of this thing, to sell tickets and to get people's eyeballs on the product. That's why Brock should be there, to sell tickets, not to be the champion. We all know he's part-time. We all know he's not going to be there 4 times a month, So Roman is there. Roman is a full-timer. He's someone they've dedicated a lot of time and effort into to put over as a champion, as the tribal chief. Then let him have it. Yeah, and they don't realize also someone's push or someone's heat does not have to be at the detriment of someone else's. There's ways to book things, book finishes of matches, book people to go over where the good guy wins, but the bad guy doesn't lose the heat. If you book things properly, and if you take into account long-term planning, you don't have to sink someone's ship just to get someone else's to set sail. You should have a whole armada of stars. That's the goal. So when they let go of potential stars, like Daniel Bryan, like Bray Wyatt, you just limit your options. Suddenly you have to go Brock and Roman because Roman's ran through everyone else, all the other top contenders. So who's left? Brock. Somebody call Brock and pay him $1 bazillion. Meanwhile, they could have had 3 top stars at the cost of Brock Lesnar had they taken the time to put the effort into getting these people over and solidifying them as top guys. It's just short-sighted on their part. It's just not proper planning. It's irresponsible and lazy. So, unfortunately, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if WWE is something that in the future we're going to lose touch with, even as old school wrestling fans, because a lot of us are loyal to wrestling, and there's peaks and valleys, and we're all aware of that. But with WWE, it's like they just know they're going to make money in spite of themselves. And that's something CM Punk says during the pipe bomb, that Vince McMahon is a millionaire who should be a billionaire. And that he's going to make money in spite of himself, and that CM Punk is just a spoke on the wheel. When he said that, it rang true, and we all knew that to be true, and it raised the bar. And then suddenly, flash forward 7 years, they push CM Punk out of their company by mistreating him. Then he has to take a sabbatical to get himself right. That's how toxic that environment was for him. And then he comes back, but he doesn't come back for the WWE. He comes back for the competitor as just a big old slap in the face of the machine that was WWE, or as CM Punk said it, the same place that got him sick. He was never going to return to that. Why would he? Why would you return to a toxic relationship? And it all makes sense. And then it rings true to us. We feel like we're in a toxic relationship with WWE. It's just that it's that girlfriend who texts you, or ex-girlfriend who texts you in the middle of the night, and you're like, shit, I don't want to respond. I don't want to watch SmackDown. But you're like, I'll give it a shot. Hear some good things. Hear that John Cena came back. You're like, okay, cool, let's watch. But it's never consistent enough. He just comes in, loses to Roman or whatever it is, and moves on. It's all temporary. There's nothing we can depend on. There's no consistency. Again, it's like that ex-girlfriend. You text her, you reminisce about good times, and then you realize, oh wait, this is the same person that I couldn't stand when we were in a relationship the last time. So to me, there's a lot of work to be done on their end. There's a lot that they can do, and Vince McMahon. There was a lull in the mid '90s for Vince, and he was getting taken to the woodshed by WCW, and he took some chances, did things a little bit differently in the spirit of competition, and came out on top. I just don't know if we can apply that same confidence to Vince today, because that Vince McMahon at least understood or put people in positions to be successful that did understand, pop culture and the society in general. However, he's just an old man now, and there's just no way he's gonna know what's gonna appeal to me or to someone 5 years younger than me, 10 years younger than me. Welcome everybody in the chat here. If you guys have any questions, just let me know. I'm here. It's an open forum as well as a wrestling discussion, so more than happy to interact with the wrestling denizen. With all that in mind, for instance, feel good moments. They do this thing. They did it with Nikki Cross. We talked about that, where she was a superhero or some pretend superhero or whatever it was, and they have her beat Charlotte, I think it was, or for the women's championship. And you're like, oh, great, awesome, yeah, it's a big moment, but it's fleeting. It's fleeting in the sense of that a superhero being the women's champion is not gonna. There's not a lot of shelf life for something like that. So suddenly, she gets put in a position where eventually it's just going to default back to Charlotte. It's just going to default back to Becky. It's just going to default back to... They did it with Becky, too. They had her come back and win. At least when they had Punk come back, he didn't come back and beat Kenny Omega night one and squash Kenny's push. But they did have Becky come in and beat Bianca Belair like that. And where does that leave Bianca? On an island. Something that was working, and then they just abandon ship and default back to something else. Over and over and over again. And again, it's not just Brock, Becky, Charlotte. Meanwhile, on the other side of the fence, they're aware that, okay, Daniel Bryan can come in, and he's a better fit legacy-wise to face Kenny for the belt. speaking of long-term storytelling, thank you, Tech, for the subscription. 2 months. We really appreciate that. We appreciate any support. And we can give you some long-term storytelling. Hopefully, here that you don't get from the WWE. With that in mind, they just know they're just going to put people in a position to succeed. With Daniel Bryan or CM Punk. He comes in and it's about his legacy. This isn't about the belt for Punk. He doesn't need to be the champion. He's aware of that. So he's like, oh no, I'm going to come in and prove to me that I can still do it. I'm going to come in and prove, I can still hang with these guys, with the Darby Allins, with the whoever's next on the list. That makes sense. I think before Punk and Daniel Bryan and Adam Cole to come in and intermingle with Omega and the Bucks and Cody and yada yada. Unfortunately, AEW was in a position where the inmates are running the asylum, and there was a lot of, I was critical of it too, where I was like, man, they're just playing fast and loose down there on AEW. But I think they were just doing what they were gonna do until they could draw enough attention to bring in a big signing like a Punk, like a Daniel Bryan. Because to me, getting Big Show or getting Mark Henry or getting Aleister Black or getting these guys, it wasn't really, they didn't think that was going to be a needle moving thing. They were just, it's part of the process of luring in the people who will move the needle. That's what they needed to do. So to me, that's getting a Punk, a Daniel Bryan, somebody who's going to bring in hundreds of thousands of viewers. That's the needle moving that they were trying to get to. So all these other signings that everyone, that doesn't make any sense. Why bring Big Show in to be a commentator? Why bring Mark Henry in to be a commentator? No, it was just posturing. They were dangling carrots. And they knew that they could just show, we could pay these people. We can pay the big stars. We can get more eyes on the product. And then if you sell to CM Punk, hey, we have the eyes and we have the proper environment for you to be there. Taurus, thank you for the subscription as well. We appreciate that. We appreciate the support. We appreciate anybody who's stuck around as wrestling, kind of navigates through this valley. And I can see a rising motion, especially on one side of the fence. So it shows me if it's the Vince McMahon of old, he's going to react to this. He has to. There's nothing to do but react. And then you have guys like Mick Foley coming around and saying, oh, WWE, you have a problem. There's a problem building on the horizon. You need to address it. And then WWE goes, nah, business as usual. It's been 20 years since anyone's ever has actually competed with us, so they're resting on their laurels. They're stuck in their ways. And I'll tell you one thing. Vince McMahon can best Ted Turner. Vince McMahon can best Jim Crockett Promotions. He can run all the old territories out in the 80s. He can do all those things, but the one entity that is undefeated all time is Father Time. And Vince cannot compete with Father Time. And if time passes him by like it is, what he needed to do was delegate to someone like Triple H, who is a little bit older as well, but still has his finger on the pulse and is in the trench of the business itself. He knew what was working. He got guys like Nakamura over, Joe, Aleister Black, Adam Cole, Johnny Gargano, Tommaso Ciampa, anyone and everyone you could think of. Anyone who came through NXT and got over was the champion. This could be a potential big star. But they would proceed to pull the rug out from underneath these guys as soon as they made it to the main roster. It's been an exercise in futility. And when you have someone like Mick Foley, an old wrestling mind, and we talked about old wrestling minds before, you need old wrestling minds to blend with a new guard. You need old wrestling minds to give the new guard direction so they know how to apply that athleticism, that charisma, the talent. However, They don't do that. They give these guys temporary and limited amounts of time to show they can be the next big star without guiding them and showing them the path to do so. And oh yeah, with Mortal Kombat, definitely. I got Turtles, Mortal Kombat, Simpsons, Marvel vs. Capcom. It's a tough game though. You play it on a harder difficulty, man. I swear to you, Mortal Kombat cheats once you get higher up on the totem pole there. So, speaking of getting high up on the totem pole, they don't even allow these guys to get high up on the totem pole. It's like the stars that they made. And what's so funny about Seth Rollins or Roman Reigns, these guys are products of OVW. They're not even NXT products. They aren't even guys who came through in that type of developmental program. Is there anyone who came through NXT that you could say is a top star on the same level of a John Cena or Randy Orton that came through NXT? They always get treated like stepchildren. Your Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn's, they did Joe, even Keith Lee. There's just so many more people that we could say, yeah, it just didn't work out, than guys that it did work out for. It's insanity. How could they be the guy on NXT television, the guy, and generating 800,000 viewers or close to 1 million viewers like AEW was upon its inception? You know, these guys were generating that much. These younger guys were. Then they just see all this talent, all this potential, and they just snuff it out. They just put the flame out. It's crazy to me. And as I'm sure it's frustrating to continue to watch as a wrestling fan. But we don't want to give up on it. You don't want to just be like, screw it. I just don't like wrestling anymore. Because nowadays there's alternatives. Back in the late 90s, it was broadcast television. It was cable. You either had Nitro or you had Raw. And as long as Vince was better than Nitro, he knew he was the guy that people had to go to. But now it doesn't really work that way. People will be like, oh, now I can watch Japanese wrestling. Now I can find out what Kenny Omega's doing. And that's what people were doing, watching these big Wrestle Kingdom events, you know, with the Young Bucks, with the Bullet Club, with Cody Rhodes. And they said, oh, this is cool. It's a nice alternative. Sure wish there was something like this on a consistent weekly basis. Sure wish I didn't have to see it once a month in the Tokyo Dome. And then they said, oh, sure, let's do All Out, or All In was the original pay-per-view. And people went, oh, crap, you can get all these guys under one roof. Maybe this is doable. And then they took that as the kind of the pilot episode to take to a network, to take to an investor, to say, hey, let's do something. Do some on TNT. Let's do AEW. And then you got a mark like Tony Khan. He said, oh, yeah, great. This will be awesome. I'm going to win Booker of the Year because Dave Meltzer says so. Okay. But being Booker of the Year because everything else, winning by default because everything else is horrid, that's not really something to hang your hat on. So, to me, and to other wrestling fans, I'm sure, we would like some consistency on both sides. Maybe this whole influx of talent will eventually beat Vince over the head to say, I have to do something. And whether it's him directly or he says, you know what, maybe this is a young man's game and I'm just out of touch. But he's Vince McMahon. Not just Mr. McMahon, not just this egotistical, maniacal, crazy man that you see on TV, but he's a businessman. Right? Wouldn't you think that eventually a businessman would understand that his business is failing and making all the budget cuts in the world and cutting loose all this talent and potential future stars? That can't be a good business decision unless, of course, you're thinking about selling the property. And maybe that's the case. Maybe he's just being frugal so he can make a sale. And then here's the hope. Here's the hope that whoever he sells it to has a better finger applied to the pulse of wrestling than Vince does currently. And I don't ever bet against Vince McMahon because I've seen what he's done in the past. So I'm sure there is the potential for recovery. As far if I owned a company like that and I was restructuring and cutting people loose and consolidating my funds and consolidating, my expenses, that usually points to something along the lines of, yeah, perhaps there is a sale in the works. But it really depends on what that really means. Um, it's hard to think about. I'm even here drinking that concept in just for a moment, living in a world of a world wrestling entertainment not captained by Vince McMahon. That just sounds crazy. Well, no, and them doing it in sports all the time, like when let's say who's the guy, the Clippers owner guy, and the Clippers owner guy, oh, it went from him, Donald Sterling, was that his name, over to Steve Ballmer. It's like basketball is basketball though. It's an actual competitive sport. It's not an entertainment property. So it's something that, regardless of management change, there isn't really a directional change other than how you construct your roster, who you put on the court. You know, with this, it's like there's not just who you put in the ring, but there's a philosophical change that'll probably take place as well. You know, but Vince has been at the helm. It's been a family business for forever and ever. I don't know how long Vince Sr. was doing it, but when it was the WWF, forever and ever ago, and then it passed on to Vince, and Vince did that, and he was hoping he'd be passing it on to Shane or Stephanie or the stepson Triple H, or not stepson, sorry, son-in-law Triple H. However, it's not working out the way that they planned it. So who knows? As far as selling, this would be a sell low move, I think. And that's the opposite of good business. You don't want to buy high and sell low. So I'm not sure. It's a very interesting period of time in wrestling. It feels like a universal shift. Like maybe AEW does start putting the right pieces in the right places, and all these potential stars they have make the jump to be taken more seriously. I would never disrespect Vincent Kennedy McMahon. That's what I'm saying. I said I'd never bet against him. However, the proof is in the numbers. The proof's in the money. The proof is in the pudding. That AEW's got some mojo going right now. And we're in the early stages of that. Meanwhile, Vince is treading water. It's a very interesting period of time in wrestling. Transitional even. And so I know it's hard to watch, but it's easy to just say sold on tight, because maybe we'll see where that goes and how that plays out. So be excited as well as you can. It's very interesting. Circling back around to concepts like what WWE is doing right is something like taking the belt off of Bobby Lashley and putting it on Big E. Is there enough wind in Big E's sails to be as big of an attraction as Lashley has been, or at least consistent in that way? Maybe. Will he be a better champion? We'll find out. That's a good thing. That's a calculated risk. Not just some bring Goldberg in to beat Lashley and put the belt on a 50-something-year-old man. Like, it's just short-sighted. So why not just bring Big E up instead of pushing other people, bringing them down to that level? That's the whole point of promotion, right? Wrestling promotions. You're supposed to come up, not get suppressed, not go down. So we'll see how that goes. Big E cashed in, beat Bobby Lashley, became the WWE Universal Champion, I think it is. Let me double check that. I can't ever tell. They split these belts up, and then I'm just like, whatever. It's the actual WWE Championship, which is great. That's awesome. He becomes the second African American WWE champion, which is after Kofi Kingston. That's awesome. So that makes Roman the Universal Champion. Sorry, when you have two belts that look identical, but one strap's blue and one strap's red, you know, it's hard to differentiate. I think that's awesome though. I think given Big E, he's been there a long time, paid his dues, so that's great. That makes sense. As long as they don't just use him as a stepping stone to bring geez, I don't even know. Randy Orton, for instance. Yeah, because he needs a 27th title reign or something. He's going to beat Big E. It's just not necessary. If you're going to build new stars, build new stars. Let them show what they got. Kofi did it. I think he was great. And when we went and saw a live show here in the area when Kofi was the champion, you could hear it. People loved it. It was cool. It was great for his hard work to pay off that way. Long-term storytelling. They had no choice but to make it a long-term story because Kofi'd been there so long. Why not, give him credit where credit's due. Let his hard work pay off. And that's a feel-good moment, and Kenny's saying in the chat here, yeah, can't stop watching that over and over again. That's a feel-good moment. Awesome. However, it's about what you do with it going forward. What do you do now? How do you build upon that moment? It can't just be a Nikki Cross thing. Don't, because you're just underselling someone's ability to draw, someone's ability to sell tickets, someone's ability to beat the guy. If you just give them a temporary run and then just send them back to the mid card, it's just not a viable solution going forward. And I don't know how many different ways I can say that. To me, I just keep circling back to the same thing. It's short-sighted. It's lazy. And I remember I saw this picture online not too long ago. It was like it was behind Stephanie McMahon's shoulder, and it said, "It's like you guys aren't even trying," is what the sign said. And you know what? That's the truth. It's like they're not even trying. And I know this is the most somber episode of the Wrestling Den there's ever been because there's no camaraderie here. It's just me talking about the sad state of affairs over on the WWE side of the fence. But it's the sad reality of something. And it would be funny if it weren't so sad, right? So to me, and again, to other wrestling fans, we just expect more, want more. We love wrestling. Let us have wrestling. Stop with sports entertainment. It works on a dollars and cents level, but they need to realize that wrestling is a novelty. It's not a novelty item, but a niche item. It's something that people who like that sort of thing like that sort of thing. And when it did blend together in the late 90s with the Attitude Era, when it became a pop culture phenomenon, that's great. You can make a ton of money that way. And then you turn it into an entertainment company, and then you rest on that, and then you make a consistent amount of money. But there's never any growth or change. Are you at a certain point, are you doing wrestling a disservice by treating it like an entertainment company? What happens to professional wrestling when World Wrestling Entertainment has a stranglehold on it? When these two things, they clash, their philosophy clashes. They just don't work in tandem like that. That's why professional wrestling is a dirty word to Vince McMahon, because he doesn't want it to be a sideshow, carny. He doesn't want it that way. He wants it to be Disney. He wants it to be larger than that. They need to make the new wrestlers be something to the fans by making them average. They're killing their own pride. Absolutely, they're suffocating their own self. Like, seriously, it's a self-inflicted wound. It's crazy. And then they started talking about self-inflicted wounds when it came to these signings. If they would have treated Adam Cole right and paid the man and brought him up and gave him the spotlight he deserved, would he be in AEW right now? Would Daniel Bryan be in AEW right now? Would CM Punk be in AEW right now if they would have just treated them with some modicum of respect? That's the real problem, because you are motivating these people to prove you wrong. And it was like Michael Jordan back in the 90s, or any professional athlete, honestly. They don't need any motivation to apply their craft. They're already professionals. You don't need to light their fire. And that's what they did. The WWE handled these things so poorly and pushed these people around, and then they said, "Okay, that's enough. I'm just going to go somewhere else." And then now they have all the motivation in the world to stick it to the people who they felt have done them wrong. And the same cultural shift happened from WCW, early 90s WCW, into the Attitude Era in the 90s. Cactus Jack, Mankind, Stone Cold Steve Austin. The biggest thing in wrestling in the late 90s was born of Steve Austin and his frustration with how WCW handled him. He was trying to be an up and coming star. He's kind of being held down by the Ric Flairs of the world. Then he got injured, and they fired the man while he was sitting at home. And then he went to ECW. Then he got a platform to vent his frustrations and talk about how they canned him while he was sitting up at home injured. And then that was the infancy of the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. Then he came over to WWF, and they said, "Well, why don't you do a little bit more of what you were doing in ECW?" They got into Vince's ear and said, "Yeah, let the man be the man." And then Stone Cold Steve Austin was born. So just imagine, just for a moment, that WWE and what they did to, say, Adam Cole is an example of what WCW did to Stone Cold Steve Austin. So now Adam Cole comes over to AEW with an axe to grind, with something to say, and a platform to say it, because now they're on national TV. See, nobody else had that except for TNA briefly. But then they defaulted back to Eric Bischoff's Hulk Hogan old guard BS strategy too, instead of letting guys like AJ or guys like Kazarian, Chris Sabin, Alex Shelley do their thing. Samoa Joe, whatever. But going back to the example of Adam Cole, you don't need to highly motivate someone as talented as that. And that's how WWE lucked out with the summer of Punk, because Punk had those same frustrations and was slighted in that same way, but he re-signed with the WWE because he knew that TNA was small potatoes, and they had done CM Punk wrong too. They did CM Punk dirty in TNA, so he wasn't going back there either. So he's going to stick with what he had. He didn't have any other choice. So he did. So he vented those frustrations in real time in that bubble, and it set off all of these things in motion that culminated in what ended up happening in AEW and his return. He tried to make it work there, and despite his white hot heat and his best effort, there was just never breaking through this artificial glass ceiling. Because unless you work out with Triple H, unless you're a part of Evolution, or unless you are one of the giants, unless your name's John Cena or Dwayne Johnson, Punk just knew he was never going to be considered on that top tier echelon like those guys were. He was always going to be the champion who wasn't in the main event of WrestleMania, kind of thing. So tried to make it work, and he had to, and I feel bad for him on a certain level too. He had to quit wrestling, something he loved, something he'd given his life to, a craft he's applied. And he had to give it all up because he just couldn't work it out in that system. He was so burnt out, slamming his head up against the wall in futility. And that was it. WWE lucked out by the fact that they got this bump in ratings, and they got this raising of the bar in real time from CM Punk. They should have been cognizant of that. They should have respected that, but they didn't. So they ran him out of town, and now he's on the other side. And what they need to be careful doing, what Ron Killings, R-Truth, or what Booker T, or whatever they negative things they have to say about CM Punk, you don't motivate the man. Don't motivate these guys to be even more, because then they're a monster of your own creation. And that's the thing. AEW is a monster of WWE's own creation, because had they handled their business correctly, there wouldn't have been a need for an alternative. And some people don't like peanut butter, right? Some people don't like peanut butter. So Nutella exists, right? But Nutella is like most people have a jar of peanut butter in their cabinet. They don't have Nutella in their cabinet. Well, maybe. Point being, because peanut butter is the standard. Peanut butter is not going to do you wrong. But if they just changed how peanut butter was made and it tasted like crap, you'd probably start searching for an alternative. And that's what's happened here. We've all had WWE shovel crap in our face for so long. Even me, I have been a fan of wrestling since late 90s, 96 or something. 25 years. And I'm like, look, WWE, we got a lot of good memories. We go way back. But I just don't know if I can do this anymore. That's tough. That's hard. And so I think we all just hope for the best when it comes to that. And I know I'm reading this like a eulogy, which is crazy to me. It's not over. The fight's not over. It is only just begun. However, it's looking bleak, is all I'm saying. It's looking rough. But whoever's going to captain that ship, whether it be Vince, Triple H, whomever, a collection of people, it's not the death of WWE. It's not rest in peace. Saying it ain't going to be a post-mortem. But they need to do something. Because they might not be dead, but AEW is killing them. So you got to do something. And when all the talent, all the available talent is leaving you and going somewhere else, it's like the opposite. It's kind of like when Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit and Perry Saturn and Dean Malenko showed up on WWE television, right, a little bit after Chris Jericho did, and a little bit after the Big Show did. When all these younger guys, it wasn't Hogan, wasn't Nash, wasn't Flair, Sting, it was your new generation of talent shifted over to come work with WWE's new generation of talent, with Triple H, with The Rock. Austin is a little old guard, so is Mick Foley, but you get what I'm saying. There was something new and hot going on over here. And then there was this big shift. And then the nail in WCW's coffin was that. They were treading water, yeah, because Austin and Tyson and WrestleMania 14 and all this stuff. But when they're younger guys, the guys it was at least your pure wrestling guys who were bringing in the undercard and getting eyes on the product, so then you could trot Hogan out to do back rakes and eye pokes, at the end of the show. They could have an NWO circle jerk. All of those people who watched Jericho, all the Jerichoholics, all the Eddie Guerrero fans, all the Benoit fans, all the wrestling fans shifted. They just kept losing until the game was over. And that still even took a few years. So I don't know. Like I said, the fight's not over, but WWE's certainly on the ropes. They got a puncher's chance. Because if you got Vince McMahon, no joke, no disrespect to Vince McMahon. If you have Vince McMahon, you got a puncher's chance anytime. But in this instance, I think Vince is Apollo and AEW's Rocky. I don't know. Regardless, I'm not 100% sure if this show is an hour long or an hour and a half long this week. But I think based on that might be a good place to close. We should all have our eyes on these products. We should all be looking very closely at the moves that are made or the potential sale of WWE lines out with AEW. Because one of the biggest concerns for me with this hearing that Bryan Danielson is going to face Kenny Omega for the title is, as much as I like Bryan Danielson above Kenny Omega, what does it say to your long-term storytelling and your star building in AEW if this guy comes in from the other side and beats your best guy on pay-per-view? Honestly, what does that say? It's not a good look. So don't do Kenny dirty either. I might have a difference of opinion on how Kenny Omega conducts his business, but don't do him dirty like that when he's supposed to be your guy. That's a WWE move. That's an old school TNA move. Bring a guy in, he's from the other side. What you're saying is those guys are inherently better than your guys. And it can't be that way. Because that's promoting the enemy to an extent. Yeah, they're on your show now, but that's to say, if we're basing this in reality, even the slightest, we're supposed to say suspend disbelief, and these guys are warriors, gladiators. That means the gladiators from the other side are tougher, stronger, faster, more cunning than your gladiators. It don't make no sense. So no, Bryan Danielson should not go over Kenny Omega. But I guess we'll see what happens. Either way, I think that's a good place to close. Like I said, I'm holding out hope. I'm a WWE guy. As far as the Wrestling Den goes, you can find us every week here at 7-ish o'clock. And I'm sure Rick will join me next week. We'll be, because I haven't been here for a couple weeks either. We'll get the dream team back together, the Mega Powers, yeah, and we'll continue to deliver to you this wrestling show that you can find on Google Podcasts, somewhere else. Look, I'm not the hype guy. I'm just the guy who runs his mouth. So with that, I thank everyone who participated in the show tonight. Everyone who subscribed, thank you very much for that. We do appreciate the support. And just like everyone else, we're wrestling fans, and we just want wrestling to return to its former glory. No, it'll probably never be the Attitude Era again, because that's a perfect storm of pop culture and violence. But soap opera with muscles. However, let's navigate this valley together so we can reap the rewards and the benefits of when this thing peaks. And I'm peaking just thinking about it. So long. We'll see you next week.